Hi there, Year 10s. Welcome back to Term 2, Week 1 of our Civics and Citizenship studies entitled Government in Our Region. So the idea for today's lesson is we're just going to spend some time reviewing the Australian government system so we can consider it in a broader context. Where does Australia and our democracy and our government fit within the wider sphere of the world? So what I have created for you is a series of tasks to be completed by the end of each week. So things that need to be completed. First one is the Rights and Freedoms investigation, which was handed out at the end of last term. That needs to be submitted by Wednesday of week 1. So you need to make sure that is submitted on the Connect page under submissions, or if you're at school, you can hand me the paper copy. The next checkpoint for you to be doing here is watching this lecture. It has accompanying close notes and activities, meaning there's a few words missing. So you need to print off your activity sheet. It looks like this, and you'll notice that some of the words are missing, or in some cases, there are activities to be completed. So this goes with the lecture. Make sure you've got a paper copy, or you can have 2 screens open, however you would like to tackle this. The next thing is we're going to be accessing JAC Plus, our online e-textbook, and we've got just 2 chapters to read today. I'm conscious that it is a short week and you do have another assessment task to be submitting. All we need to do is looking at the key features of Australia's government and India's system of government to compare and contrast. The last thing that you need to be doing is creating some kind of compare and contrast, some kind of diagram, poster, table, some kind of visual representation that really shows what these 2 systems have in common and what they have different to one another. And that needs to be posted on the discussion page. I think I'll make that due actually the start of week 2 will be fine, given how crazy things are at the moment. So that is our aims for this week, our first week back of Year 10 HASS. Let's get into it. The first thing I'd like you to do is have a look at these 4 words. Hopefully they're familiar to you. You should have covered most of them in HASS already in Year 7, 8 and 9. What I'd like you to do for task 1 is I'd like you to pause the video here and just write down what you know about these topics. Where have you heard them before, in what context, politics in general, writing around the words what you know. So pause the video here and complete task 1. So once we've done that, let's just quickly recap, make sure we're all on the same page. First one here is federation. This is the coming together of the 6 British colonies to form the Commonwealth of Australia. And it was at this point that our nation was actually formally founded, and that happened in 1901. So we are really quite a young country, and this really sets out the system of government that we still use today. Democracy, always one of our guiding principles when we look at civics, is the idea of power by the people, for the people. It's where we elect people to represent us in government, and we have a say in how our country is run. It's very much about people. And as we start looking a bit broader in the Southeast Asian region, there's a lot of countries that don't have those same democratic freedoms. Sovereignty basically refers to the right to rule. Who has the power to rule over people and the power to make laws? Now, this is the word where the word sovereign comes from, which often means king or ruler. Now, there's not many countries left in the world, Brunei is one good example, that still have a king or a queen as the absolute monarch, the only ruler left. Sovereignty is important because we have a constitutional monarchy here in Australia, which means that we have a constitution, but we also have a sovereign, a queen, who acts as our head of state. The final concept, which is important for us here, is the separation of powers, the idea that the parliament, the executive and the judiciary, the courts, have to be separate. No one group can become too powerful. What I'd like you to do here, please, is there's a few words missing from your notes. So the main thing that we need to appreciate about democracy and different types of democracy in the Southeast Asian region is Australia has a representative democracy. The idea that we pick people to represent us. We don't have a direct democracy like they did in ancient Athens. It just wouldn't function. Even with a small population of 25 million people, it wouldn't function if everybody got up and had their say about how they think the country should run. So we elect people to represent us in government. They have to make laws that people like, otherwise they risk not being re-elected. So the words that we are missing here are representative, where people vote to elect people to represent them in the government, and they risk not being re-elected. The next thing you need to do, please, in the 4 boxes is you need to copy down these: represent, legislate, scrutinise, and form government. So please add that to your worksheet now. The next thing that's really important to realise is there is a division of powers in Australia, and this is our 3 levels. Sometimes we use a pyramid to show federal government at the top, most powerful, state government, and then local government and councils. So when we federated in 1901, the biggest issue was how power was going to be shared between the federal and state governments. So they agreed to divide up the power, and this is really what the Constitution says. Each level has different powers, responsibilities. The federal parliament, located in Canberra, makes laws for the whole country: defence, trade, currency, immigration, foreign affairs, really big stuff. The state parliament, ours is located in Perth, makes laws for that particular region or state. So things like public transport, education, emergency services, infrastructure like roads and railway networks, it comes under the state government. And then depending on where you live, there will be a local council, and they do your day-to-day stuff, picking up the rubbish bins and the verge collections and registering dogs and all of those kind of things. So the federal system is definitely the most important thing. So there's a few words missing here in your notes. You need to add those to your list before you continue. Pause the video if you need to. The next concept, and it's important not to get these two mixed up, is a separation of powers. So when we are looking in the federal system, so we've got our pyramid, federal, state and local. In the federal system, the powers are divided up to make sure that no single group becomes too powerful. Nobody has the power to make the laws, apply them and interpret them, because it can make groups or individuals way too powerful. It's a system of checks and balances. Checks the work of the other 2 areas. Make sure that the government is doing the right thing by people. So there are 3 branches which you need to write down in your notes, please. The first one is the parliament, sometimes called the legislature, because it makes the laws. Parliament makes laws for people. The next group drawn from the parliament is the executive. The governor general and the prime minister are the leaders, and they draw people out of the parliament to form the cabinet. Senior ministers, they put those laws into action, like the minister for education, the minister for defence, the minister for health. And the last group is called the judiciary. So this is our judges, our law courts, our different hierarchy of courts, to make sure that laws are actually put into place. So please add these words to your closed notes, and then you've got task 2 to complete down here. What is the difference between division and separation of powers? Pause the video here while you complete that question. There are 3 other principles that we need to consider when we look at the Australian government system. So these need to be included on the table at the bottom of the 2nd page of your worksheet here. The first one is liberal democracy. Liberal liberty, think of the Statue of Liberty in America. It's about freedom. It is very much that governments must protect individual rights and freedoms. They must limit how much control and influence the government actually has. Like, we have laws about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. In fact, at the moment, a lot of those freedoms have been curtailed by the current pandemic, and it's only when people go, what do you mean I can't go to the beach, or I can't gather in a group of more than 5 people or 10 people or 50 people, that we really start to go, we take a lot of these freedoms for granted. Now, that doesn't mean complete chaos and anarchy. The government does have the ability to protect and limit behaviour, but not total control, not a totalitarian system. The next one is representative government. The government must reflect the views of the people. We have to have elections frequently, and if politicians don't reflect what people want or think, they will not be re-elected. In the federal, elections are every 3 years, and in the state, it is every 4 years that we have elections. Elections are compulsory in Australia. You have to vote. Voting is compulsory. You have to go and vote. If you're over the age of 18 and you're enrolled, interestingly enough, Australia is one of the few democratic countries that actually enforces compulsory voting. And the last thing here is responsible government. You have to answer to the Australian people. You're accountable, basically. This is where things like question time and having an opposition to basically check the work of the government to make sure that it's not derogatory or not useful to the Australian people. So add these to your table now. Parliament of Australia has 3 really important components. The first one here, the Queen and the Governor General, we shall call the Crown. And this very much reflects Australia's British-based history, the fact that our political system is based on the British Westminster system. It's got a lot of similarities, and the fact that we are a constitutional monarchy. We have the Queen as our head of state, but she doesn't really run the country. We also have, very importantly, the Senate, the upper house, and the House of Representatives of the lower house, which forms the Parliament of Australia. So the first one, the Queen and the GG, the Governor General. The current Queen here is Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarchs, and her representative in Australia is Sir Peter Cosgrove, elected in 2014, chosen by the Prime Minister and approved by the Queen. They have a very ceremonial role. Apart from giving royal assent, that's some of the words you need to write in, signing the laws that makes them officially laws rather than just acts of parliament, a lot of their duties are very ceremonial. They also have the power to dissolve or end the parliament. The Governor General has this power. If the parliament, both houses, are blocking the passing of an important law, can dissolve the parliament and call new elections, which did happen once in Australia's history. So adding in these words, please. The last task for you to be completing in this lecture, Year 10, is this part here. So it's the bottom of page 3. You are looking at the main functions and the main roles of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Hopefully this will be a bit of revision to you, so I'll go through it fairly quickly. House of Representatives, HOR, is 150 seats representing 150 electorates or geographical areas Australia is divided into. For every electorate, there is roughly 100,000 people, about 95,000 people. Often called the People's House. It's supposed to represent the interests of the people of Australia, and its main role is to form the government. As you can see here in orange, this is the political party that forms the majority. They've got the most seats. They have to have at least 76 of 150, an absolute majority, and then we can debate and discuss the issues of the day. The Senate, on the other hand, is the upper house. It has 76 seats, and it's often called the States House or the House of Review because it exists to almost check and review the work of the House of Representatives. Laws have to be passed by both houses in order to become legal in Australia. So there are 12 senators per state and 2 per territory. So making sure we've got this is more of a review house. So adding that to your notes now, please, Year 10. Hopefully now we've got a pretty good revision of the Australian government system. Hopefully a lot of it was revision for you. What we're looking at now is the kind of broader context, looking at Australia in the geographical area in which we are positioned. So you can see Australia just down in this little bottom corner down here, just top of it, poking into the Asian region. There's a lot of countries in here, some of the world's most populous countries like India, China, and Indonesia. 1, 2, and 3 most populated countries in the world. And a lot of these countries have very different systems of government. We're going to focus on India for our comparison. They have a democracy, but they have a president and a prime minister rather than a constitutional monarchy. Some other interesting systems of government. We have China here, which is communist still. There's one party, the Communist Party of China, not having free or fair elections. Other countries, Vietnam is also communist, and Laos is Lao People's Socialist Republic. And in both of those countries, there is only one party to vote for. Particularly Vietnam, they're quite stringent and strict on that. Countries like Thailand are similar to Australia in that they have a constitutional monarchy, that they have a government and a prime minister, but they still retain their royal families, like the king. And in Thailand in particular, it is the monarchy is revered, that you have pictures of the king and queen and princes and princesses in pretty much every house and shop, and they are not to be criticised. Countries like Singapore, again, can't have the illusion of democracy, but often there is only one party to vote for, and they are very, very powerful. Indonesia is an interesting one. Australia's closest neighbour. They have a republic. There is no monarchy, no king, no queen. They have a president and a prime minister, and a lot of their law and legal system is guided by Islam. Last one, which I find particularly interesting here, is Brunei, a little tiny country. They are one of the few countries in the world that is still an absolute monarchy. There is a sultan, like a king, and he is everything, the head of state, the head of government. What he says goes. Last one you may be familiar with is Myanmar, formerly Burma, which for a lot of its history has been ruled by a military dictatorship, one person or one group of people in charge. Leading on to our next activity, Year 10s, you're comparing Australia's system of government with the system of government that exists in India. You'll find the reading for this as chapters 1.2 and 1.4 on Jack Plus, which you need to read through, and you are specifically comparing and contrasting the following topics: elections, how often they're held, who can vote, how the voting is counted, the structure of the parliament. Are there two houses? What's the history? Are they both from the British system? Who has the power? And the separation of powers as well. How do they divide up responsibilities, powers and duties amongst the different arms, the legislature, the executive and the judiciary? So finding a way to represent that information, please. Information on the next slide. Made it, Year 10s. So once you have submitted your task 2 Rights and Freedoms investigation, you have already viewed the lecture, completed the closed notes. Next task, head on to Jack Plus, very short, few paragraphs worth of reading, and then creating some kind of Venn diagram or visual representation showing the similarities and differences between Australia and India's system of government. I look forward to seeing what you create on Connect. You can either do this old school Venn diagram, copy from the previous slide, or you might like to use something like canva.com or make your own PowerPoint, use any of the technologies if you are so embracing our online learning. Okay, I shall see you very soon, Year 10s. Thank you.